Hello, hello. If you are caught up on your Odysseyware math lessons, then that means you are all set to take quiz 2. And before you take quiz 2, I wanted to go over some of the things that are going to be on there because we have done, I want to say 5 lessons that will be covered on quiz 2. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and I'm going to show you some important things that you can, that could help you on this quiz. And if you want to follow along with me, I would either write some notes on scratch paper, notebook paper, or I have put this actual document on Schoology. So if you go under the distance learning tab on my Schoology page, you could print this out if you've got a printer and you could write on it. So the first type of graph you'll see on the quiz is a histogram, which remember is just a bar graph. The only difference is instead of down at the bottom having one number for each bar, you've got a range of numbers. We call those intervals. One thing that you will have to be able to answer on a histogram question is how many total students in this case, or how many total whatever the histogram is about. So this is about science test scores. So they could ask you how many students took the test. All you need to do to figure that out is add up the bars. So we know 1 student scored in that interval, 3 students scored in that interval, 7 students were in the 70 to 79 range. We've got 9 students here and 10 students there. If I add all that up, 9 plus 10 is 19. 19 plus 7 is 26. Plus 3 is 29, plus 1 is 30. So one thing I would be able to tell from this is that there were 30 students altogether on this graph. Okay, so you'll need to know that. Another thing that you'll need to know is the mode interval. So we can't find the actual mode on a histogram, but we can find the mode interval. And so remember, mode is the most. So most of the test scores were in the 90 to 100 range. So that doesn't mean that the mode is 10. It means that the mode interval is 90 to 100. That's the mode interval. Remember that these things I highlighted are called intervals. So basically the interval with the tallest bar is your mode interval. Another thing that you might be asked is, for instance, on this one, how many students failed? Well, failing is anything below a 70. So I would have to look at this bar and this bar together. So since 3 students made a 60 something and 1 student made a 50 something, I put those together. That tells me 4 students failed. Okay, so there will be a question like that on your quiz. And I think that's the main thing that you'll need to know for histograms. Just remember too, they could ask you something about shape. This particular histogram is not symmetrical, because symmetrical means that it's the same on both sides. So your peak or your tallest bar would be in the middle and it would go down evenly on each side. This one is skewed, and it's actually skewed left. Most of the data is on the right, which makes us think skewed right, except we're looking for the tail. So where does it get smaller? And that's down on the left. So it is skewed left. Okay, so if you have more questions on histograms, either rewatch the video or come see me on Zoom. I'm going to move on to dot plots. Your lessons didn't spend a whole lot of time on dot plots, but you will be asked about them on the quiz. So one thing you need to know about dot plots is, unlike histograms you can't find mean, median, mode, and range, but on dot plots you can. You can find the mean, you can find the median, you can find the mode, and you can find the range. I'm not going to do that on this particular dot plot, but I'm going to show you what you'd have to do first. So one thing you have to do is you have to actually write out the numbers. Each dot represents a number, So there's 1, 5. There's 2 dots on top of 6. That means I'd have to put 6 2 times. There are 4 7s, 7, 7, 7, 7, and so on. So you would write out all of those numbers, then you would be able to find your mean, median, mode, and range. Another thing that they're going to ask you about on dot plots is again about the shape. So again, let me talk about symmetrical. Symmetrical looks like that. So the peak is your tallest bar. So on this one, the peak is at 8. If this were to be a symmetrical dot plot, the peak would be at 7, and it would go down evenly on both sides. So that right there is symmetrical. And I'm going to just say symmetric. It's symmetric. Okay, so it can also be skewed. That wasn't a very good drawing of skewed. Okay, so let me erase that one. So skewed is where your peak is on one side or on the other side. So this particular dot plot is skewed left because the tail end is on the left. Most of the data is on the right. So if it's skewed left, your peak is going to be on the right. If it's skewed right, your peak will be on the left. And the only other thing you need to know about a dot plot, and this could go for a histogram too. You had a question about this on one of your lessons. Sometimes mean is better and sometimes median is better. So median is better for when it's skewed. Mean is better when it's a symmetrical graph. So on this particular graph, I would want to make sure I used the median and not the mean. Okay, so let's move on now to box plots. Most of you have been doing really well on box plots. And so there are 5 main things that you need to know about for box plots, and they are these 5 lines, and we call that the 5-number summary. Okay, 5-number summary. You will be asked for a 5-number summary on the quiz. So your 5-number summary includes the minimum, the maximum, the median, the lower quartile, and the upper quartile. So you'll have a question where you're asked for all of those, and you'll have a question questions where you're asked for one or another one. So they might ask you on this one, what is the upper quartile? And you would say 64. Or they might ask you, what's the minimum value? And you would say 51. On a box plot, you can also find the range. So range, just like in your median, mode, and range lesson, means your max or your highest value minus your minimum or your smallest value. So on this one, we would do 67 minus 51, which would give us a range of 16. You could also be asked for the IQR, or the interquartile range. So that means it has quartile in it. So remember that that means you're going to subtract your upper quartile minus your lower quartile. So on this one, that would be 64 minus 57, which would give us an IQR of 7. Another thing we need to remember is what quartile means. So quartiles are these 4 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, and each section makes up 1/4 of the data. So if I were to want to ask you how much of the data is found between 51 and 57, right here, you would say 1/4, because that's 1 quartile. But if I asked you from 51 all the way to 60, that's 1/4 and another 1/4. And if you put those together, that's half. So you just have to know that each of those little chunks, each quartile, is 1/4 of the data. And you also need to know the word dispersed. You saw that in one of your lessons, and some of you had questions. Dispersed means spread out. So on this one, the first fourth right here is more spread out than the other ones. So it's more dispersed. It just means spread out. Okay, and that's the last part for box plots. So there's one more section that we need to look at, and that is when they give you just a data set. Data set is just a bunch of numbers. So on this one, they've given us 9 numbers. It's really important that you make sure you write the numbers out from least to greatest and don't forget any of them. So we start with our smallest one, which is 57. And then we have, oh, no, I see I already forgot one. 56 comes first, then 57, then 59, and then 60, 61, 63, but notice there's 2 63s, so you have to write it twice. 65, 67, and it looks like that's it, but I don't just guess. I told you there were 9 numbers, so I always count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I got all 9, so if I missed one, I could go back and find that. Okay, so things that are easy to find are my minimum and my maximum, and I could use those to find the range if I needed to. So 67 minus 56 would give me a range of 11. It's also pretty easy to find my median. There's an odd number here. So if I count off 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, that leaves me with 61 in the middle. So that's my median. So we've got our minimum and our maximum and our median. Now all we need to find is the upper quartile and the lower quartile. So for that, we're going to be looking at our bottom half of the data and our top half of the data. There's 4 numbers in each one. Since that's even, that means there's going to be 2 in the middle. So 2 in the middle on the left-hand side and 2 in the middle on the right-hand side. Remember, if there's 2, you have to add them and divide by 2. So for the lower quartile, I'm going to do 57 plus 59, which gives me 116. I divide that by 2, and that gives me 58, which makes sense because 58 is right between 57 and 59. So that is my lower quartile if they were to ask me for that. And then for the upper quartile, I'm going to add 63 plus 65, which gives me 128. And then I'm going to do 128 divided by 2, which gives me 64, which again makes sense because 64 is right between 63 and 65. That's going to be my upper quartile. Okay, and they might also ask you again for your interquartile range, which is just your upper quartile minus your lower quartile. So in this one, if my upper quartile is 64 and I subtract my lower quartile, which is 58, that would give me an interquartile range of 6. And I believe that is all they're going to ask you about a data set. Now this is a long-ish quiz. It's 17 questions long, and it's got 2 paragraphs at the very end, number 16 and number 17. 2 paragraphs that you're supposed to write. I know nobody's going to be excited about that, so I am going to give you a reward for watching my video all the way to the end. So if you watched my video, and let's see, let me get out of here. I am going to give you something to write. If you write on the number 16 and number 17, if you write, I love math, and you don't have to do an emoji, but if you write, I love math, on number 16 and number 17, I will give you full credit for both of those. I love math, okay? So please come see me on Zoom if you need help, and good luck on your quiz number 2.